Okay, y'all. So today I want to talk about a topic. Do you need to go to church to have a healthy spiritual life? So hear me out. So as COVID and the pandemic came to an end, we really started to see churches noticing that it was no longer COVID that was keeping people out of the pews. It's that we found new ways to connect with God, connect with each other, and we no longer consider church to be a necessary part of our weekend routine sometimes. And that's okay. So I want to talk about it. Do you have to go to church to have a healthy spiritual life, or is it possible to grow spiritually and connect with others without being in a physical church? So that's the conversation today. So with me to have that conversation, we have Shari Sims visiting us again, returning guest, and Dr. Joy. Thank you so much for being with me again today.
Thank you.
So Dr. Joy, you are a presiding elder in the AME Church, and Shari, you are a modern spiritual yogi. And in our last episode, which was all about our brand of faith, we really dove into what those two things mean. So if you haven't caught that episode, definitely check it out because you'll hear some great conversation about what it means to be a person of faith. But this conversation is really about the church. And it's interesting because I think people really put the church and faith together and really exploring, do those concepts have to go together, or is it something that you can have one without the other? So I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Joy. Do you have to go to church to have a healthy spiritual life?
So I'm going to go out on the limb that I always go out on.
Go out on that limb.
And say that I don't think you have to go to church to have a healthy spiritual life.
Wait, so you're presiding elder, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to double check.
Now,
that's not what I expected to hear.
I did not say I don't believe in church.
Yeah.
I love going to church. I love that community of church. But you asked, did you have to go to church to have a healthy spiritual life? Mm-hmm. If you're disciplined enough to pay attention to your spiritual life and nurture it and grow it and explore it and learn and all of that, you can have a healthy spiritual life.
Okay. Talk to me more about that. Like, you, for example, how do you nurture your spiritual life when you're not at church?
So I found that during the pandemic, more so, I had to rely on the practices of my spiritual life. And when I didn't have the church building.
Okay.
I had to find ways to connect with people because we couldn't go and visit people. And so one of the challenges that posed to the church is, how are you going to connect with seniors and children? If you didn't figure that out during the pandemic, you probably haven't figured it out now.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. And so that is having an impact on people returning to church. One of the other things that I was sharing with some other colleagues is that churches that were not relevant in their communities, meaning that people did not find that they derived their weekly spiritual needs from that church, the ones that were not relevant prior to the pandemic are really challenged after, because the community did find ways to connect.
There were lots of options when you went virtual.
Lots of options. You could start on the East Coast, go to the Midwest, go to the West Coast, and get all the church you wanted.
Yeah, it brought a whole new meaning. You know how you have the grandma who's just notorious for having you in church all day? Now imagine you could go coast to coast. You could follow the sun with church.
And you could do that all day on a Sunday. And if you still didn't pay attention to your practices, your quiet time, all those disciplines, then you really are not improving your spiritual life. You're just going to church to church to church.
Yeah. So you said practices and disciplines. And as soon as you said that, I instantly thought of you, Shari. And you talked to us a lot in the last episode about being a yogi and the practices and disciplines there. So talk to me a little bit about that and how that relates to whether or not you need to be in a physical church to nurture that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that you do practice is it's called tapas, and that's like your fire.
Sounds delicious.
It does. And that's, it's your fire. It's your fire for your faith. It's your fire for your practice. And it's something that you have to feed constantly or you lose it. So as a practicing yogi, you know, we don't have necessarily like a church or a temple per se. You can find places like, and when I was living in Los Angeles, I would go to the Shivananda Center. It's a Vedantic center. It's where I would take classes and I would study the Bhagavad Gita, which are like one of the spiritual texts. Is where I would study positive thinking and meditation.
Run that by me one more time. It's the
Bhagavad Gita.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, it's a long allegorical, it's a poem essentially. And it focuses on Krishna and his brother, and they're going into battle and like all the things that happen in this battle, but they're teaching, it's an allegory, you know, they're teaching the tenets of yoga through this allegory. So, you know, I had a community there, but when I left Los Angeles and I moved here to Arizona, you know, I lost that. So it's easy to become disconnected from your faith and your practice if you are not feeding that fire yourself, if you do not have that tapas. So I actually felt like, you know, I went like way off the deep end with it. And I was like, well, I'm just going to have to teach this now. So I found a studio and they were already part ways through their teacher training. And I was like, well, you know, it's funny. I actually didn't go into it with the idea that I would be a teacher. I went into it with the idea that like, I really want to deepen my practice and I don't know where else to go. And this is just like kind of an obvious, convenient solution for me is to just be in this room for 200 hours and like just talk about faith. And it's funny because I started so late in this program, I actually was short, like, I don't know, like 60 hours. So I had to drive to Scottsdale and I went to a different yoga school, and it was like the best thing ever because this yoga school, they really mainly focused on Sanskrit practice and the actual, and studying the sutras. Ooh. And so it was really more on the spiritual bent, whereas the original program I was in was very much like, how do we teach people to do the movements? You know, and I'm like, that's great in its own way, but it's one of the 8 limbs. It's like such a tiny part of what it means to be a yogi. And so coming from where I came from and the practice that I was doing, which is the Shivananda yoga practice, it's like its own style of yoga. And then I joined this Ashtanga school, and that's a totally different style of yoga. I was able to like, you know, find a way to like really bring like the spiritual teachings like home for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So it really worked out. And so I definitely struggle with like the community part of it, because if you go to a traditional yoga studio, a lot of it's very Western and it is mainly focused on the physical part of it. And maybe they have a meditation class or two.
It's a workout class.
It's a workout class. It's a workout. It's very rare to find a place that is mostly focused on the spiritual teachings of yoga. And that's where I started. And that's, you know, what drew me in. And, you know, that's to me, like, that's where I found my faith.
Yeah. So it's interesting. One of the things that I heard you talk about is really that community aspect, and how when you lost your community, when you moved and your community was no longer the same, it was almost that seeking out of community. And it wasn't necessarily a church community. It's just that community of people of faith that you were looking for. And you had plenty of that quiet time, right?
Yes.
So I'm hearing different elements. So that kind of brings me to the question of, what are those elements of a healthy spiritual life? I hear there's that meditation, that seeking, that prayer potentially might come into it, depending on kind of where you're at in your journey. And then there's also that community aspect of, you know, I think that's one of the biggest things, and why I have so many questions that I just need to talk about is there's something about having this conversation, not just internally, not just with God, but being able to have the conversation outwardly too with others of faith. And you learn more about not just what others think, but you learn more about what you think.
And I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Is that these conversations really show you more of who you are.
Yes.
Am I tolerant? Am I judgmental? Am I blah, 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 blah? But it shows you more of who you are. And as you lay those things aside, you become more authentic in what you believe.
Wow. That's such an interesting concept. It's one of the things that I learned in, talking about relationships and things, they talk about relationships being really mirrors. And the reason people get mad in relationships is because they're just really showing you who you are and you don't like it.
Yes.
And it's interesting because that shows up in these conversations on faith, because really what you're building is that relationship with someone. It's a mirror, and you start confronting your own ideas about your faith and your. Yeah. So I could see where the community aspect is so important, because without that mirror, without that lens, there's a piece missing. You're just having a conversation with yourself.
Yeah. And the church house is a community.
Yeah.
And I think people really miss it. And the ones who are saying you should be in church are saying, but you're missing. They're trying to find a way to say, we miss you, and you're missing. You should miss us too.
You're part of our
Why don't you miss us?
Right. So
We still
I don't
like
think
you.
it's so much of the church building, because what we discovered is that community can happen outside of the building.
Yeah.
And that you were saying, what are some of the practices is you find communities where you can not like thinking, but a like-mindedness in terms of openness, in terms of faith. When we come down to a church and how we put our practices in play, in how they play out, a church is with the accoutrements, the crosses and the things, the holy things.
The holy things.
Yes, the holy things that make going in a place where you can feel the presence of the Lord. I'm not mocking that. That has value.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we teach about religion. We don't, in the traditional church, we don't really teach people how to have faith.
Yeah.
We teach them to hold on. We
Yeah.
teach them about who they are, but what do you believe? And we do, in some cases, teach about what we believe as Christians. Let's say the Christian faith, the one I represent, is so I know what I believe as a Christian.
Yeah.
But sometimes what I believe as a Christian bucks up against what this world is offering.
Yes. That part.
And then it's like, that's when I feel like that bamboo tree.
Yeah.
And that's when I have to go and sit before God and say, God, what does this mean? What do you want me to get out of this?
I really love what you're saying, because I think it resonates with me. I go to church. Every week, mostly because I run the sound. Sometimes
You have to
when
be
I
there.
don't have to run the sound, I have questions. But the one thing that I see is missing, not just in my church, but I get the privilege of really just being just an observer of a lot of churches, being very involved in a church community that's a little more universal, is I see that we brought back coming to the physical building, but we didn't bring back those elements of community that I'm hearing you talk about. And it's interesting because I think we put too much weight on just the physically coming together and not what we're supposed to be doing there. We get really worried about, well, what is the ministry doing? Is sister so-and-so doing her responsibility? Do we have enough ushers? And then we say, oh, well, we don't have enough members to have a gathering. We don't have enough interest to do, a ministry where we're bringing the young adults together, or a singles ministry, as we talked about earlier. That is something that I would love to see, a singles ministry. So it becomes a conversation of, have we really lost that biggest element, that biggest piece that the church was giving us before, which is that community? And I think, presiding elder, you were there when we had a forum at the AMA church, and we were talking about young adults in the church and why we're losing them. And we had a panel of young adults. And one of the things that they said was, we miss the cookout. We miss those opportunities to come together. And it's not the stuff we typically think of as one of the value propositions of the church. But it was that coming together. It was that informal, we're going to have food after the church. Sister so-and-so done cooked tonight. That had so much value.
It does.
And
it does.
We don't think of that as related to faith, but it goes back to that relationship, that mirror, and having that trusted person that you can have authentic conversations with about your faith, or that you can call when you're having an issue, because that's the person who can really be a good mirror for you.
when I was living in LA, at the time that I was attending the Shivananda Yoga Center and taking classes there, I was the manager of a wellness center.
Okay.
And at this wellness center, we had like every esoteric healing practice you could think of, everything from shamans. We had, tarot card readers, and we had, astrologers, but we also had, Feldenkrais workers and acupuncturists and reflexologists and Qigong masters and Tai Chi classes and like every form of yoga on the planet, people came and taught there. And it was the most eye-opening experience of my life. And as the person who was helping run the joint, one of the main things that we did was bring people together quarterly for these massive community gatherings. And we would sit in community with one another in a circle in a room with like 50 people. And we would just be in conversation with one another. And then those conversations would carry on for the months leading up to the next one. And when that place sadly closed, it left so many of us adrift, because a lot of us who don't prescribe to a religion per se, are craving that community. And it was like the first time that any of us had really ever had it. Yeah. And you talked about maybe not being like-minded, but to me, it's like we're like spirited. Ooh. And these people, I felt like they saw me, and they saw my curiosity and my desire to learn and just grow as a human being and as a spiritual being. And I feel like that's really where my faith journey started, was in a place that was not a church. Yeah. By any measure, with no pastor, with no really formality. There's no teachings. It was community. It was people coming together and sharing what they believe and what they know and what they think. And it was the most magical experience. And I was in my early 20s. So it was a really formative part of my life. And I have so many friends. I was in LA this weekend, and I was with people that I worked with at that place. We're still friends a decade and a half later, wow. Because that was the strength of the community.
Absolutely.
And so you're right. That is what people miss. It's the cookouts, because that's the time that you get to have the conversations. You can't talk in church.
No. Well, you can.
You can, you might, yeah. You're probably not supposed to, but that's your opportunity. That's your opportunity to connect with your community members. And so, I am jealous of people who go to church, honestly, for real. And I know that jealousy is not an emotion that as a yogi you're supposed to hold on to.
It's a very real emotion.
Yeah.
So there are aspects of that communal gathering that what I'm hearing is there are aspects of that communal gathering that is desirous.
Yes, extremely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things you said, and I'm not trying to take you from the questions, but one of the things you said, Shari, is about being a spiritual being. I am clear that we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes, completely.
And so as a spiritual being, we came here for community. Mm-hmm. It's that human experience that gets us in trouble.
We crave it.
Yeah. Because now I got to look at you and see how different you are from me. I got to see how, I don't look for the God-like person inside of you. In our tradition, the Christian faith, we said in the beginning, God created man in his own image, man and female, male and female in his own image, in God's own image, his being plural, God's own image. And so if I believe that, talking about my faith, right? If I believe that, then I have to believe that when I look at you, I'm looking at God.
Yes. Same in yoga, the exact same.
Right. And so, and then that leads to the question but you look different from me. So then there must be diversity in God.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Right?
That's deep.
It really is.
It sounds like a whole nother episode right there. Let's just put a pin in that one.
We'll be back, guys. We'll be back.
Well, we're definitely that. So Shari, we were talking a little bit. I heard two things come out, and I want to dig in because I know that they're a little bit more well-defined in the practice of yoga. Or as a yogi, there's probably more defined elements that come into that spirituality. Mm-hmm. So two things I heard so far. Mm-hmm. Community is really important. So relationship with others and relationship with God. So that quiet time, that prayer is that relationship with God and you. Mm-hmm. So relationship with God, relationship with each other. What else are other components to a healthy spiritual life?
Sure. So one thing I just want to put out there is that there are 4 different paths to yoga that you can follow. So you can be a bhakti yogi, that's a devotional yogi. So they believe that they are in relationship with God, and they do that through chanting, kirtan, which is singing, chanting, and meditation. And then I consider myself, and then there's like Raja, which is like, you're looking for like study. So like you go through like, you're studying everything. It's like that's like the royal path. That's what they would teach like the kings and like the kings back in the day. I am like a jnana yogi. So like, I believe that like, I get closer to God through my experiences in life, and that like every life experience brings me closer to understanding myself and understanding other people and like how I'm operating in the world. So it's self-study. I believe in using the powers of my mental capacity to like, am I being judgmental? Okay, let's look at that. You know, am I being tolerant? Let's look at that. So it's like my whole life is my spiritual practice. My road rage is my spiritual practice today.
Yes.
You know, my impatience is my spiritual practice. My conflict that I might be having over my husband loading the dishwasher the wrong way, again, is my spiritual practice that day. And I'm having to deconstruct, why am I reacting this way? You know, why am I struggling to see the God in him, the God in this other person? You know, why is it hard for me to see their soul today? What is it about me that I'm struggling with? So it's that practice of like deconstructing constantly throughout my day and making sure that I am leaning on my practice in my times of trouble. But it's so hard because like in your times of trouble, you just like, it's the first thing to go. You know, it's the first thing that like for me as a yogi, if I'm struggling, if I'm busy, if I'm grieving, if I'm I don't want to be alone with my thoughts. They're scary. You know, it's not easy. So, you know, it is, yes, that time is important and community is important. But for me, it's self-study.
Yeah.
It's self-study.
I like those last two because as you talk, I just hear how it shows up in what we try to achieve with the church, right? I'm seeing the parallels so naturally. It's just, there's the learning, like that study to show thyself approved. It what instantly came to my head. And in church, you know, you're reading the Bible, or, you know, there may be somebody up speaking a sermon, or, you know, whatever it's called in the different faiths, and they're teaching you something. So they're kind of input teaching. But then there's also that aspect. And I want to say and put it out there that maybe that's an aspect that we're missing as well, is that self-study. And I see that come up when the really strong ministers are good at taking whatever they're teaching you and helping you understand how to apply it in your life. And honestly, I find that to be one of the missing pieces. I've been super vocal, maybe too vocal, about how I struggle with sermons because that's not how adults learn. I've studied adult learning, and being preached at with something that may or may not be relevant to their lives. You miss that fire that you were talking about earlier. Yeah. And so when you just preach at someone and they leave, that word, that seed you planted in their spirit, it doesn't grow. It doesn't have that opportunity. It doesn't get watered throughout the week with that self-learning, because they don't walk away with any steps that they can use. You know, it's a lot of sometimes just speak of like, oh, the blood. And it's like, okay, yeah, that may mean something. But if you just walked in off the street, or if you're not old school church person, that may not have like an emotional reaction to you. And if it's just an emotional reaction and it doesn't then help you understand, how do you apply, oh, the blood in your day-to-day life go?
Yeah, I wouldn't know where to start with that.
Right. So it's so those two aspects, it's interesting because even though we're talking about things that exist outside of the church, I'm seeing how it helps us create a blueprint for how do we make the church an effective place for that community, for that conversation with God, for that self-study, and for that the directed study that goes into you. And whether you choose the church to be that place where you get that, or whether you get that somewhere else, making sure that you have those elements seems really key to that healthy spiritual life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a couple of things, and I'm hopeful I can remember them now, but you were saying, about the self-study. One of the ways when I said earlier that the church doesn't teach about how to have faith, it's not that we don't talk about faith.
Yeah.
And we don't demonstrate faith. Like I know God's going to come through, right? And I'm unwavering in that. And when God comes through, I knew God was going to come through, you know? But it's even more like you were talking about with the sermon. Like, my responsibility going to church for my own self-study is not to go listen for what God might be speaking to me for somebody else. You know, you have many a times when you say, oh, you should have been at church today. That sermon was just for you. No, boo, it was for you. And so one of the responsibilities we have around our own self-study is when we come in, we're asking Spirit, what are you showing me today? Because if he can make a animal talk and speak and people listen to it, certainly there's a message in a bad sermon.
I'm going to need you to show your bath. What are we talking about?
Donkeys.
I'm assuming this is from a passage.
It is.
Okay.
I was like, wait a minute. There's a story behind that.
Is it that movie that came out that last time? No, Eddie Murphy wasn't the one?
No, that's Shrek.
Okay.
I like that one too. But no, seriously. It really is about the responsibility that I have for my own spiritual growth. I cannot leave that to a spiritual director. I cannot leave that to a pastor. I cannot leave that to a shaman. I can't leave it to them because they're there to help me, to guide me.
Ooh, I like that. So then, I mean, what responsibility do we as churchgoers, if we choose to go to church, have in helping to make that experience work for us?
Be nice to people.
Oh, that helps. Sister so-and-so, stop commenting about the pantyhose. She's not going to wear pantyhose. Slapping her thighs is not going to make it better.
Okay, that part too.
Sorry, that would have been, was that personal? Was that you? Was that her from this
Yeah, this is the personal experience.
I love the tradition that I'm in. Now, at the same time, I think there are some things about tradition that when we get to a place 20, 30 years later, we might want to review that. And see, is that a man-made thing that's really now a stronghold or a chokehold in some ways for someone learning or coming to find God, right?
Yeah.
Or is it still applicable? Is this still a tool for learning about yourself and about God?
I feel like you are just the fountain of future topics, because that's one of the things I think we need to dive into, right? Is what are some of the things that we're doing in the church that's actually driving people away instead of bringing them closer? And I think that holding on to traditions and not assessing whether they're still serving us is one of those things. That's a whole nother topic.
But to add to, and I have a lot to say on this, so I'm sorry if I'm taking over, but there is if we don't understand what is happening societally, for example, we expect everybody to be in church every Sunday. When we think about the young people, why did you bring the kids to church?
Yes.
Well, this wasn't my weekend to have them.
That part.
You know what I'm saying? In today's society, we have children who are being the co-parenting situations, and they're not with you that weekend. And, oh, by the way, when they are, I want to do something fun with my kids.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that, because one of my biggest pet peeves is when the person finally comes to the church, and whether it's sister so-and-so or whether it's the pastor at the pulpit, someone coming and saying and giving them a guilt trip about how often they should be there.
This is why my mom stopped going
now.
Yeah, that's why she stopped going. She's like, I can't handle the guilt trip.
Yeah.
And I think you once said it best, like sometimes they come in looking for God and they find you instead.
Absolutely.
And that's what drives people away from the church. See, we could end the topic on that right there, but we're not going to end it because there's so much more conversation. Awesome. So I do want to ask you specifically, because you are a presiding elder in the church and you have a really good idea of the infrastructure and what it takes to run a church. So when we talk about people choosing to go other places for that community, for that self-learning, for that directed learning, all of that, what are the pros and cons of that, and what is the impact of that on the church?
Well, let's start with the impact, because we know that there is a decline of some sorts in some congregations, not all. But the impact is that people don't know how to bridge the remaining or how to nurture those who remain.
Ooh.
Right?
So like if I'm not preaching to a congregation of 1,000, I don't know how to preach to a congregation of 4.5.
That's one. Yes. Like how do I go from this to this, from big to small? But the other piece on that is then how do I go, those folks that are missing, my telling them they should be here, my going after them has not worked. So how do I learn to live with the loss of those people and nurture the congregation that's there.
Wow. It's like when you go to a church and all they talk about is growing their numbers, but they're not doing anything to nurture the people that are in the house. Can I get an amen?
Amen, amen, amen. I'm not going to lose my job over this because I've said...
I don't think that your church works that way.
It does not. It does not.
They got to just deal with it.
I absolutely believe that part of my call is to help usher people into a different place with God. And if that means that I have to have the church of the one bowl, one chair, and we meet in the beauty salon.
Wait a minute. Is that an option?
Well, because that's where we gather.
Right.
Right. Or if it's coming to and I developed this mindset more clearly as a presiding elder because I don't have a congregation that I am a pastor over, that I'm responsible for directly.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a way to get those who are still seeking but have been hurt by certain things, church people, whatever, that won't go back but still needs to be invited in. Right? Invited into what? Invited into the experience, invited into the journey, invited into the faith walk. Okay. They need to be invited in. And we've got to find safe places for them to be able to come in and be okay with how they come in.
In my mind, I think that that's the value of ministries. I think sometimes we get it twisted and we think it's so much about the work, which the work is important, but it's almost the journey. Right? It's coming together to do the work. It's coming together for a shared mission. It's, coming together because you have something in common, which is often the ministries are around either women or young people or single people or married people. And so I resonate a lot with what you're sharing with us.
And we invite other thoughts to come in and explore, again, from that spiritual being, having a human experience. The human experience doesn't begin and end with the traditional church.
No, it does not.
And we miss out on a lot of opportunity and a lot of opportunity to connect and to feed into one another, to help each other grow. That's not my problem because they're not in my church or my denomination. Well, yes, it is because it's a societal problem.
Yeah, we're all connected.
We're all connected.
Wow, that's so powerful. So I'm going to ask an unpopular question, though. So part of me wonders, as you look at fewer people going to the physical church, that sometimes also means fewer people bringing that dollar to the front at the end of the service. How is that impacting the church? And more unpopular questions, at what point do pastors need to look at their church and reassess and say, maybe we're not a 500-person church. Maybe we are now a 100-person church, and we might lose our status within our district or within our whatever your thing is, but we need to right-size our church. Maybe that means a building change. Maybe that means we stop acting like we're the biggest church in the area. I don't know. I'm glad you already said that you can't get fired, but how does that play in? And when do we need to start thinking differently about our churches?
Okay, first of all, I didn't say I couldn't get fired. I said I probably won't get fired. Okay. Lady J, that is so a significant issue right now. Mm-hmm. That we have congregations of 5 and 6 people trying to sustain a building and, and doing all this stuff.
I don't pay tithes like that. I try, but not like that.
It's hard. And sometimes we have properties that are fully paid off, so there's no debt to it, but it's not really servicing the community. Yeah. So now I'm going to step into put my other hat on, which is, that's God gave me that too, formal training around how are we managing the assets and the utilization of assets in our churches.
Yeah. And is that a good utilization of your assets? If you only have 5 or 6 people, do you operate the same way?
You cannot operate the same way. And so we don't teach that it's okay to right size. Because to right size, you got to get ego out the way. Because there's an acronym, ego edging God out. To to right size, we have to get ego out the way. Me going to another church that may be smaller in numbers but is a better fit for my lifestyle should be an okay thing, and it should not mean that I'm getting demoted or anything like that. It means I make a life decision for me that's good for me, the community, the church. It's good all the way around.
Yeah.
The only one that's not good with it is the people that have those isms, others, and shoulds on what that needs to look like.
Yeah. It blows my mind, and I don't know if this is my millennial mind, that we still look at numbers of a community or a church instead of looking at like the works or the fire or the passion.
Impact.
The impact
on the
That's
community.
it, the impact.
Yeah. See that it's interesting to me to hear this conversation, because it's not something I've really ever been a part of, but like as an outsider, quote unquote outsider, like looking in, I always, there's this hilarious show on HBO called The Righteous Gemstones. And it's about this family. They run a mega church in the South. And they're just like not good people. Like it is all about them Benjamins. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but it's funny to like watch something like that. My husband grew up in a mega church. I did not know this about him until we watched the show.
And he was like, honey, that's totally true.
No, he was like, it's hilarious for him because all the things they do, like there's like these big muscle men that like go around, and it's like part of like the youth ministry to like get kids like yoked on church. They do like strength lifting and look at, God gave me this strength and all these things and all these. Yeah. And like they have like, big, like a big puppet hall where like that's where the kids go. It's like a massive like arena basically. And I'm just like, man, this must cost so much money to run. And so it boggles my mind that like there has to be a point where like you lose touch.
Yes.
Because you cannot sustain something that big if your main, directive is always just faith and just community impact. Like you have to be looking at the bottom line because you have to keep the lights on. You have to keep everybody paid. You got to keep the bill, the roof can't be leaky and like all these things. So yeah, it is so interesting to hear you say like, needing the church needing to be comfortable with right sizing and keeping the focus where, in my opinion, it belongs, which is on faith and nurturing people's faith, whether that congregation is 100 people or 10,000 people. So yeah, it's fascinating to me. Like I look at like the church building as a business. Like I see it as a business. Like
the church is a business.
It is totally a business.
No,
so
that's not a popular
that
thought,
it's
but
not
the truth.
Yeah. Okay.
We're not winning any points for popularity with this episode, but we are going to speak some truth, explore some concepts, and maybe we help some people just get freed from some of those thoughts that aren't serving them.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to drive anyone away from the church. Far be it. I just want to create an environment where we come in, and if we're going to be people who are called by God's name, that then we act like it. Like, why is it so hard for us to forgive one another? Why is it so hard for us to allow somebody's journey to be their journey? Why is it so hard? So that's when I say we're not teaching certain things. It's being taught, but the responsibility on the disciple or the person learning is that they then have to put it into practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think when we start out the episode, it almost does sound like you're questioning the value of church, right? But I think even through our conversation, we hear the value. All of those things that it takes to have a healthy spiritual life, we said we can find those things in the church. I think it's more about refocusing in on those things, doubling down on those things, and making the healthy spiritual life the center of your church, not numbers, not how big your building is, not where you rank amongst other churches, not that your granddaddy's granddaddy used to run this church. All unimportant things to those who care. But it's more important that you're nourishing a healthy spiritual life with those that you are a shepherd over. And that is why the church is there. And focusing in on that within the church draws more people into the church who may not be attracted to a church just because it's a church.
Absolutely. And if you're keeping up with them because you care about them, the numbers are there.
Yeah. It's almost like you chase the money, you're not going to have money. But if you chase the people
and the purpose,
the purpose, yes, then they come with money. I don't mind giving to things that I believe in. Mm-hmm. I don't mind giving to organizations and people who are doing the work.
Yeah.
I do mind. And this is my own spiritual discipline. I have to pray about, God, what they did with it the last time. I don't know if I want to do it this time. And he said, that's not your choice.
Yeah.
If I send them to you, then you're to help them because you're blessing them I'm blessing them through you. Mm. And I have to be okay with that because at the moment, that's my assignment.
Yeah. Wow. So big question. And I'm going to ask both of you, even though you have very different experiences with church, community, etc. If you could take the church, the traditional church, and return it to pre-pandemic era when, virtual church wasn't as big of a thing and all kinds of things, would you?
Yes. And let me tell you why.
Okay.
Because that was the gathering place. And for some communities, that was the place where you felt like somebody.
Wow. Okay. So it's really that community aspect. You'd return it back almost to help us rediscover our community,
yes.
which we lost.
Yes. And that in person. But my hesitancy was around no, because we can't return like it was. Mm. How did that work for us?
Yeah.
We have to be more intentional about what we're doing and the impact we're having on people's lives. People are going through some very, very tough times.
Yes.
Society is bizarre right now. And it can't be smoothed away. Mm-mm. We have to work through it. So we have to teach people how to work through their faith.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
If you get to know who you are.
Yeah.
And you subscribe to do no harm. Mm. Then the protesting comes with that undergirding. Now I'm looking at ways to make things better for all of us, right? And it's not with the intention that, what is this going to get me? What is this going to get me? Because I'm clear that some of the things I do, the work that I do, I might not benefit from, but generations will. Mm-hmm. And so my otherness focus is how I express that. I'm good. As a purveyor of joy, that's where that comes from. I'm good.
Yeah.
But when I show up, joy has to show up. Somebody needs it.
Somebody needs it, for sure.
Or to even understand that in this convoluted society that we're in, kind of the veil is lifted, right? And we're in this place where almost everything's being challenged. You got to know that there's a constant. And the constant has to be what you believe in your faith.
Mm. Wow. Okay. So, Shari.
Yes.
I know that you've mentioned that church isn't something that you've traditionally been a part of, but kind of hearing the conversation and knowing that church, or at least the community therein, is something that you've been drawn to. If you could return the church to pre-pandemic levels, is that something that you would want to do? And is that a place you would want to go? Or are you like,
doesn't matter to me. No, I'm just kidding.
Right?
No, I would say no. Yeah. And so I'm going to kind of frame it from my experience of like teaching and my classes and what that was like, because I had to go virtual during the pandemic as a teacher. And I feel like, prior to the pandemic, I was like all over the place. Everybody was so busy. Everybody was always running around. Everybody was just like out all the time. And I feel like a lot of our attention was very split. I feel like now people are a lot more intentional about where they spend their time and how they spend their time. Is it really worth it to get dressed, get in my car, drive somewhere for however long, spend the hours, drive back? Like, do I want to dedicate? I never thought about it.
Yeah.
It was just how things were.
I had to put on zipper pants.
Right. And now, I feel like the community that I have now that I'm back in person, I was extremely selective about where I went back in person. And the places that I am, spending my time teaching currently, the community is stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Because the ones that are there really, really, really want to be there and really, really, really missed it and really, really, really need it. And I feel like the level of depth that we have now as a community, it's so much stronger. The desire there is so much stronger. The willingness is so much stronger. I feel like the faith is stronger. I teach at like a secular place.
Mm-hmm.
However, I very recently made the commitment to myself to no longer hold back the things that I believe. And, if that's going to turn people off, I guess so be it. However, I feel like the response has been amazing. The conversation now is so much better. Like, takes me forever to get out of my classes because everyone's like, what did you mean when you said this? I really liked when you said that. Tell me more about that. I'm so interested in that. I never knew that. I never thought about it that way, And all of a sudden, like, there's just like, I feel like this, like, the faucet has been opened. And I feel like that, like you said, people are just hungry. Like they really want it. And I feel like, it kind of separates the wheat from the chaff a little bit. And it's like, the fair weather folks are kind of gone. And, it's like the real ride or die people are the ones that stuck around. And I'm here for it.
Yeah. It's almost like a blessing in disguise is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, yes. But to your point too, I love this conversation. So everybody, thank you. Your assignment is not to teach everybody.
No.
Right.
No.
And so what this has done is allowed us to come and the folks that are drawn to us that we're supposed to share, because everybody can't teach, right?
No.
And that's okay because they have a different assignment. But the ones that come are coming hungry, ready, willing to learn, ready to go higher.
Yes. Ooh. Yes.
And that's where I spend my time.
See, if we were at church, I'd be like, these are your 4 bullets you need to write down.
That's right. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you willing?
I am hungry.
Do you want to go higher?
So as we start to close out this conversation, I'm really hearing a powerful message. It sounds like it's almost a gift that we got, the pandemic. It's not only do we learn new crafts and all of a sudden we realize that we love quilting and sometimes we want to be a bartender and quit corporate America. All kinds of things people got from it. For the church, what I'm hearing is that those who are still with you, they are committed. Value and cherish the people that are still there. Consider whether it's time to right size and embrace your new normal. And when focusing in on what you're about as a church, double down on the things that are required for a healthy spiritual life. Double down on the community. Double down on the learning, and not just the learning within the 4 walls, but the learning that happens within outside, and help your flock understand how to create that learning and how to create that space for themselves outside where they can commune with God and commune with others. And also I'm hearing that outside of that, church is not the only place. We can come together as a community of, even if we have different faiths like we have here at this table, we can come together and still support each other, still serve as that mirror for each other so that we can learn and grow together and have a healthy spiritual life.
Absolutely.
Wow. I thank you both for being a part of this conversation today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Yes.
This has been great. Honestly, this is literally what I'm looking for. You know what I mean? Like these are the conversations that I'm craving, that I miss. And like, I'm so glad that you're doing this because it's not easy to find people who are willing to put their differences aside and just come in with an open mind and explore and learn from one another. And, to see the parallels, like so many parallels, is so affirming Because like you said, are you ready to go higher? That's the place that I'm in right now. Like, I feel like my commitment, I've always known that my path is my spiritual path. That is my path in life and what I'm put here to do. So it's been so lovely being here as a guest, because it just makes me feel like I really am in the right place at the right time. So I thank you.
Love that.
We're so grateful that you got this vision to do this, and I know it's going to help shape and change lives and bring people closer to their faith and more real and authentic for who they are. Then they can show up for others more authentically. Thank you, Lady J.
Yes. Thank you.